Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're interested in memory techniques and sent over a fascinating collection of sources, including excerpts from Tony Buzan's speed memory.
Cool.
So today, we're going on a journey through the evolution of memory techniques,
Okay.
pulling out the most useful and interesting bits for you.
Right.
By the end of this,
Yeah.
you'll not only have a grasp of how memory systems have developed over time,
Right.
but you'll also be armed with some powerful techniques to try out yourself.
Okay, cool.
We're talking remembering names,
Uh-huh.
dates,
Yeah.
even entire speeches.
Wow.
Get ready to level up your memory game.
I think you'll be surprised by just how long humans have been fascinated by memory
Right.
and how early thinkers tried to make sense of it.
Okay, let's untap this,
Yeah.
starting with the history of memory.
Right.
I read that some ancient Greek philosophers had some pretty interesting,
Hmm.
if not slightly offbeat,
Yeah,
ideas about what memory is and how it works.
they really did.
Really?
For instance, Parmenides.
But back in the 6th century BC,
Mm-hmm.
thought memory was a mixture of light and dark,
Oh, wow.
or heat and cold.
Interesting.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Never forgetting anything simply by staying perfectly still.
That's a fun thought. But then, wouldn't learning anything new be impossible if your mind was always frozen in place?
Right. It
Mm.
seems like he saw forgetting as a kind of disruption,
Yeah.
as if memories were getting jumbled up.
Okay.
Then there's Diogenes of Apollonia, who believed memory was all about having balanced air distribution in the body.
Wow. These ideas are so different from how we think about memory today.
Yeah.
It really highlights how much our understanding has evolved.
It really does.
Wow.
And then, of course,
Yeah.
we have Plato and his famous wax tablet hypothesis.
Plato's wax tablet. I've heard of that. Isn't that the idea that our minds are like soft wax that receives impressions? And forgetting is like those impressions fading.
It still seems relevant today when you think about how we store information digitally.
Right.
I mean, is our brain really that simple?
That's a great comparison.
Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's like saying our minds are like hard drives
Uh-huh.
and forgetting is like deleting files. But is memory really that simple?
Right.
This idea that memory and forgetting are two sides of the same coin dominated thinking for centuries.
Real.
Even Zeno the Stoic,
Okay.
who added the idea of sensations writing on the wax,
Yeah.
didn't stray too far from Plato's model.
So if the Greeks were so focused on this wax tablet analogy,
Yeah.
what did the Romans bring to the table, so to
Yeah.
speak, when it came to understanding memory?
Well, the Romans were surprisingly practical.
Okay.
They were less concerned with theories and more focused on developing actual memory systems.
So are we talking about those early versions of the Lincoln Room systems you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
The ones we'll be exploring later in this
Yep.
deep dive. Precisely. They understood the power of associating ideas and using spatial memory to improve recall. But then there was a bit of a slowdown in scientific progress for quite a while.
Right, the influence of the Christian church.
Yeah.
During the Middle Ages,
Yeah.
their teachings shifted the focus away from the physical mechanisms of memory.
Yes. With Galen's work in the 2nd century AD being a notable exception,
Okay.
even his significant contributions to anatomy and physiology,
Right.
particularly his understanding of the nervous system,
Yeah.
were influenced by prevailing religious thought.
It makes you wonder how our understanding of memory might be different today if scientific inquiry hadn't been stifled for so long.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But thankfully, things started to shift in the 18th century with thinkers like Hartley,
Okay.
who, influenced by Newton's ideas,
Uh-huh.
sought to explain memory in more scientific terms.
And his vibratory theory was a big departure from those more mystical explanations of the past, right?
It was. Hartley likened memory to vibrating particles in the brain.
Okay.
Of course, we know now that it's much more complicated than that.
Right.
But it was a step in the right direction.
Okay.
Then the 19th century brought us even more breakthroughs.
Okay.
Prochaska finally debunked the idea of animal spirits.
You know, I've always wondered about those animal spirits. Like, what were they supposed to be exactly? Some kind of magical memory juice.
Right. It seems almost silly now.
Yeah.
But for centuries,
Right.
people believed these mysterious forces were responsible for controlling memory and other bodily functions. And although Florenz got it wrong when he suggested that memory wasn't localized but spread throughout the entire brain,
Okay.
he was on the right track in trying to locate it within the brain.
It's incredible how far we've come
Yeah.
in just a couple of centuries.
Hmm.
It really makes you appreciate the persistence of these scientists.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And speaking of progress,
Yeah?
the real game changer was discovering that memory resides in the cerebrum,
Okay.
the outer layer of the brain.
Oh, right.
And that brings us to modern memory theories
Okay.
and the three main areas of research.
Okay.
The biochemical basis of memory,
Right.
the distinction between short-term and long-term memory,
Okay.
and the effects of brain stimulation on recall.
Hold on. Before we move on,
Yeah.
can we talk about the difference between short-term and long-term memory?
Sure.
I think understanding that will be really helpful for our listener,
Yeah.
especially when we start delving into specific memory techniques.
Great point. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
This is where the duplex theory comes into play.
Right.
It basically says your brain has two different storage areas.
Okay.
One for immediate use,
Ah.
like remembering a phone number just long enough to dial it.
Right.
And another for storing things long term. So,
Like your childhood memories
yeah,
or the lyrics to your favorite song.
that makes so much sense.
Right.
It's like having a mental sticky note for temporary information
Yeah.
and a vast library for everything else.
Exactly. Now think about how far we've come from those early Greek theories.
Wow, yeah.
We've gone from mixtures of light and dark to understanding complex neural networks and biochemical processes.
Crazy.
It's truly remarkable how much we've learned about this complex and essential human function
Right.
in just the last century.
It's mind-blowing, really,
Huh.
from RNA's role in memory formation to
Sure.
the idea of separate memory systems.
Uh-huh.
It seems like we're just scratching the surface of what our brains are capable of.
Absolutely.
And speaking of memory systems,
Yeah.
knowing how our understanding of memory evolved
Right.
helps us appreciate the ingenuity of these memory systems
Yeah.
and the techniques we're about to discuss.
Are you ready to dive into some practical techniques that you can start using right away? Absolutely. Let's do it.
One of the simplest and most effective techniques is the link system. It's all about creating vivid mental connections between items you want to remember.
I struggle with remembering lists. How would the link system help me with that?
It's surprisingly effective. Tony Buzan uses a shopping list example in speed memory to illustrate this. Let's say your grocery list includes seemingly random items like bananas, soap, eggs, and glasses.
Okay.
Instead of trying to remember them individually,
Right.
the link system encourages you to create a story, linking them together using absurd and memorable images.
So instead of just trying to remember bananas, soap, eggs, glasses,
Yeah.
I'd create a story that connects them.
Exactly. You can imagine yourself slipping on a giant banana peel in the grocery store,
Okay.
then falling headfirst into a mountain of soap bars.
Oh my gosh.
As you're picking yourself up,
Yeah.
you accidentally knock over a pyramid of eggs.
Oh no.
Then they all shatter against your new pair of glasses.
That's hilarious. I can already picture it so clearly. The key is to exaggerate, make things move, and not be afraid to get a little silly with it, right? By linking those images together,
Right.
you create a mental chain that helps you recall the entire list in order.
You got it. The link system really taps into the power of visualization and storytelling.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to a slightly more advanced technique, peg systems.
Okay.
Think of them as mental coat hooks where you can hang information.
Mental coat hooks. I like that. Buzan introduces a few different peg systems,
Right.
starting with the number shape system, right?
Yeah.
This one seems particularly useful for recalling information in different orders, numerical, reverse, even random.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned wanting to improve your recall,
Mhm.
and this system is perfect for that.
Okay.
The number shape system works by assigning a memorable image to each number based on its shape.
Right.
For example,
Yeah.
the number 1 could be a tall, thin object, like a pole or a pencil because of its shape.
And the number 2 could be a swan because of its curved neck.
Yes.
I'm
Exactly.
starting to see how this works.
You're catching on quickly. You then link the items you want to remember to these number shapes. So
Mhm.
if you wanted to remember telephone as the first item on a list,
Uh-huh.
you might picture a telephone dangling precariously from the top of a very tall telephone pole.
Okay.
For the second item,
Oh, yeah.
say bread,
Uh-huh.
imagine a swan gracefully swimming with a loaf of bread tucked under its wing.
I'm already starting to see how much easier this would be to remember than just a plain list of words.
Okay.
I also read that Buzan mentions a similar system called the number sound system,
Yes.
which uses rhyming words instead of shapes.
So for the number 1, you might
Sure.
use sun, or bun.
Mm-hmm.
And for number 2, you could use shoe or blue.
Okay.
It's all about finding what resonates best with you.
So using the number sound system,
Right.
if I needed to remember telephone as the first item, I could picture a giant ringing telephone scorching under the intense heat of the sun.
Exactly. You're getting the hang of it.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Now, before we move on to more complex peg systems, let's touch on a couple of others.
Right.
The classical room system and the alphabet system.
The classical room system sounds intriguing. It sounds like it really taps into our spatial memory.
It does. This system, which actually dates back to the Romans,
Okay.
involves mentally placing items you want to remember in specific locations within a familiar room.
Okay, so let's say I'm trying to remember that same grocery list.
Yeah.
Bananas.
Yeah.
Soap, eggs, and glasses.
All right.
I could picture a bunch of bananas hanging from the ceiling fan in my living room.
Okay.
A giant bar of soap blocking the doorway.
Mm-hmm.
A carton of eggs balanced precariously on the armrest of my couch,
Mm-hmm.
and my glasses perched on top of the TV.
You've got it.
Yeah.
The more vivid and unusual you make those mental images, the better you'll remember them. And that's the beauty of the classical room system.
Yeah.
It leverages the power of a space you already know well.
Okay.
Now, the alphabet system is similar,
Right.
but uses letters of the alphabet as pegs instead of locations.
So A is for apple, B is for book, C is for cat, and so on. I could use the system to remember a list of tasks for the day.
Precisely. Each of these peg systems has its strengths and weaknesses,
Okay.
but they all rely on the same principle, linking new information to something you already know well.
So far, we've covered link systems and a few different peg systems. It's amazing how many different approaches there are to improving memory.
And we're just getting started. Buckle up, because we're about to dive into the major system, which is truly the granddaddy of all peg systems.
The major system. I've heard whispers about this one. It sounds intense.
It is powerful. The major system is a tool for memorizing vast amounts of information, not just lists, but numbers, dates, even speeches.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. From what I understand, the major system has been around for centuries.
Right.
And it assigns a consonant sound to each number.
That's right.
Okay.
For example,
Yeah.
the number 1 is represented by the sounds T or D,
Okay.
2 by N, 3 by
Yeah.
M, and so on. Buzan provides a handy chart in speed memory that lays out the entire code. It might seem a little daunting at first,
Right.
but it becomes second nature with practice.
So instead of trying to remember numbers directly,
Yeah,
you create memorable words using these consonant sounds.
exactly. Let's say you want to memorize the number 19 using the major system.
Yeah.
You could create the word tape,
Okay.
since T represents 1 and P
Right.
represents 9.
And because vowels don't have a numerical value in this system,
Right.
you can add those in to make the words easier to remember.
Yeah.
So for 19,
Yeah.
I could also use top, tap, or even type. I don't like how flexible this system is.
Precisely. That flexibility is one of the major system's greatest strengths.
That makes sense.
Once you've memorized these consonant number associations, you can essentially create peg words for any number you can imagine.
Buzan provides a list of 1,000 peg words in his book. You could memorize an entire encyclopedia with that.
You absolutely could.
Wow.
And the major system isn't limited to memorizing lists. It's also the foundation for remembering numbers in all sorts of contexts.
Like dates and phone numbers. Those are the ones that always give me trouble.
We'll get to those.
Okay.
But first,
Yeah.
let's talk about something that I think will really resonate with our listener remembering names and faces. It's a common social challenge that can be, well, a little awkward.
Ugh, yes.
Yeah.
Forgetting someone's name right after you've been introduced is the worst.
Yeah.
It's like my brain just refuses to cooperate in those situations.
It happens to all of us. But the good news is
Yeah.
that with a little effort and the right techniques, anyone can improve their ability to remember names and faces.
Really?
It's a skill, not some innate talent.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those techniques?
Well, first, it sounds simple,
Yeah.
but repetition and active engagement are key. The more you hear and use a name when meeting someone new, the more likely you are to remember it.
So if I meet someone named Sarah,
Yeah.
I should try to use her name a few times in the conversation.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
exactly.
I also tend to overthink it in those situations.
Yeah.
And probably don't even hear the name properly in the first place.
You bring up a good point. If you didn't catch the name clearly,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to politely ask them to repeat it.
That's much better than pretending I heard it and then having to awkwardly avoid using their name later.
Yeah.
What are some other techniques?
Another powerful technique is associating the person's name with a memorable feature on their face.
Okay, how do I do that?
Buzan suggests using exaggeration and humor to make these associations stronger. If someone has a prominent nose, you could link their name to the word beak, for instance.
Right.
Imagine them with a giant, colorful bird beak instead of a nose.
That's a funny image. I
Yeah.
can see how that would stick in my mind.
It's about making it memorable.
Okay.
Buzan even shares an anecdote in speed memory about a professor who seemingly memorized all his students' names and personal details on the first day of class.
Wait, seriously, that sounds impossible. How could anyone do that?
It's not as difficult as it seems. He likely used a combination of basic memory systems,
Okay.
careful observation,
Uh-huh.
and linking techniques. By paying close attention to distinctive features and creating vivid mental images,
Yeah.
he was able to make strong associations between faces and names.
That reminds me of a time when, I met a group of people at a conference.
Mm-hmm.
I was so overwhelmed with trying to remember everyone's names and what they did that I basically just smiled and nodded the whole time.
I've been there. It can be tough,
Yeah.
especially in those kinds of situations. But the point is, with practice,
Yeah.
anyone can improve their memory for names and faces.
Right.
It's a skill,
Right.
not some innate talent.
Okay, so we've covered linking,
What?
peg systems, and even techniques for remembering names and faces.
Yeah.
What other memory challenges can we tackle with these systems?
Remembering numbers can be tricky,
Oh, yeah.
especially long sequences of digits.
Yeah.
I bet our listener has struggled with this at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Phone numbers,
Right.
confirmation
Oh,
codes,
Yeah.
those long strings of numbers they give you for online accounts. It's a nightmare.
Well, the good news is that the major system can help with this too.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about converting numbers into words using the consonant code?
Mm-hmm.
You can use that same technique for remembering long numbers.
So instead of trying to remember the number 936811147 as a string of digits,
Yeah.
I could break it down into smaller chunks.
Exactly. You could use bone for 93,
Yeah.
share for 68,
Uh-huh.
dirt for 11. Okay.
Car for 47.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
just like with the link system,
Yeah.
you create a vivid mental image linking those words together.
Okay. I think I'm getting this.
Okay.
So maybe I picture a dog burying a bone,
Mm-hmm.
then digging it up and sharing it with a friend who's driving a muddy car.
Perfect. The more absurd and engaging the image, the better.
Okay.
And that helps you remember the number sequence itself.
I can even picture those number words embedded within the scene,
Right.
making it easier to decode the number later.
You got it. And the best part
Yeah.
is you can use this same technique to remember dates,
Oh, cool.
both recent and historical.
Now that you mentioned dates,
Uh-huh.
I remember Buzan has a whole chapter on remembering dates in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Yes.
It seems like a lot to keep track of.
It can be.
Yeah.
But he offers a really interesting system that makes it much easier.
Okay.
For any given year,
Yeah.
you memorize a 12-digit number that represents the first Sunday of each month.
So, for example.
Yeah.
If the first Sunday of January falls on the 3rd,
Right.
the first digit of the memory number would be 3.
Exactly. And then let's say the first Sunday of February falls on the 7th.
Mhm.
Second digit would be 7, and
Now,
so on.
Once you've memorized that 12-digit number, which you could do using the major system, by the way,
Right.
you have a reference point for figuring out the day of the week for any date in that year.
It's like having a mental calendar.
Wow.
And he even has a system for calculating the day of the week for any date from 1900 to the present.
Okay, that one sounds a bit more complex.
Yeah.
Does it involve memorizing another long number?
It does, but it's structured differently.
Right.
Each month gets a specific number.
Yep.
January is 1,
Uh-huh.
February is 4, March is 4,
Okay,
April is 0,
got it.
and so on.
So to calculate the day of the week for, let's say, June 15th, 1943,
Uh-huh.
I'd use 5 because that's the number for June.
Right. You then add that to the day of the month, which is 15, giving you 20.
Okay.
And then
yeah.
you add a year key,
Uh-huh.
which is determined by a chart Buzan provides based on the last 2 digits of the year.
So I'd look up the year key for 43
Yeah.
and add that to 20.
Right.
And then I can figure out the day of the week using a simple calculation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might sound complicated,
Right.
but it becomes surprisingly intuitive with practice.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
No more awkwardly asking, what day of the week something falls on.
It's a great party trick, too.
Yeah. So you've covered remembering names,
Yeah.
numbers, and even dates.
Right.
What about more complex things like speeches,
Yeah.
poems, or even learning a new language?
Buzan provides some valuable tips for tackling those challenges in speed memory as well.
Okay.
For speeches, for instance, he recommends focusing on the structure and key ideas rather than trying to memorize every single word.
So instead of trying to remember an entire speech as a big block of text, I should break it down into main points and supporting arguments.
Exactly. Create an outline with keywords and phrases that capture the essence of each section.
And then I could practice delivering the speech.
Yeah.
Using that outline as a guide.
Right. That way the words will flow more naturally. And if there are specific phrases or quotes you want to include, you can always use the major system or other mnemonic devices to memorize those separately.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the material and finding a way to make it stick.
Right.
Would you recommend a similar approach for remembering poems or even learning a new language?
Absolutely. For poems, focusing on imagery, rhyme schemes, and the emotional impact can aid memory. And when it comes to foreign languages, associating new words with vivid images or stories and connecting them to words you already know can be really effective.
It sounds like the key to mastering memory, no matter the material, is to be creative.
Yeah.
Make connections.
Right.
Practice, practice, practice.
You've got it. And remember, it's all about finding what works best for you and then consistently putting in the effort to train your memory.
Speaking of training our memory, Buzan also mentions something called the ice block technique.
Right. He does. It's a fascinating technique that can essentially double the effectiveness of any memory system you're using.
Okay, I have to know more about this.
Okay.
Does it involve freezing our brains?
Not quite, although that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
A backup memory drive in the freezer would be amazing.
Right.
Just in case.
The ice block technique is actually all about adding an extra layer of imagery to your existing associations.
Okay.
Let's say you filled up all your pegs in a memory system. You can go back to the beginning and reimagine each of your associations encased in a giant block of ice.
So if my first peg word was tree,
and
I had associated it with apple, I would now picture that apple frozen inside a massive ice cube.
You got it. And because the ice transforms the original image, you've basically created a new, distinct association for that same peg.
That's brilliant. It's like getting 2 memory slots for the price of 1.
Precisely. It's a remarkably simple but powerful way to expand the capacity of any memory system.
Wow, that was quite a journey.
Oh.
We've explored centuries of thought on memory. From ancient theories to cutting-edge research. And we've learned some powerful systems like the major system, plus techniques for remembering names, dates, speeches, and more.
And now here's something to consider.
Okay.
We've talked about all these systems. But the true power of memory lies in understanding how your unique mind works.
What do you mean by that?
What connections, images, or stories stick with you best? Everyone's mind is different.
Okay.
Some techniques will resonate more strongly with you than others. The key is to experiment and find what works best for you.
Okay.
Adapt these techniques. Make them your own.
That's a great point. It's not about following a rigid set of rules. It's about understanding your individual way of thinking and figuring out how to optimize your own mental performance.
Exactly. And remember, there's always more to learn.
Okay.
Keep exploring. Keep practicing. And never stop being curious about the incredible potential of your own mind.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Now go out and put these memory techniques to the test.
Yeah.
You'll be amazed by what your mind can achieve.